The woman at that stool was never just a customer.
Blood tastes like old pennies and dirty asphalt. Most men spit it out the moment it hits their tongue, startled by the sudden warmth spreading across their teeth. Dax Mercer just swallows it. Always has. It is a familiar vintage one he has been drinking since before he could legally order anything else. He stands at the flat-top griddle at 5 in the morning pressing a heavy iron spatula against a slab of bacon. The fat renders with a sharp, violent hiss. The sound fills the kitchen the way it always does, total and immediate, like a small argument that never gets resolved. The fluorescent tube above the prep table flickers once, twice, then settles into its usual sickly hum. Dax does not look up. He has learned not to expect better from this place. Mercer sits on a forgotten stretch of Nevada State Highway between nothing and nothing else. The sign outside is a sun-bleached wooden board with black letters that have faded to a dull gray. The parking lot is cracked asphalt held together mostly by memory. There are 7 stools at the counter, 6 tables along the window wall, and a corner booth that leans slightly to the left because someone drove into the building 17 years ago, and Dax fixed the wall but never got around to the booth. The coffee machine behind the counter is the best thing about the place. It is also the oldest. Dax bought it secondhand from a truck stop outside Tonopah the year he opened, and it has never once failed him, which is more than he can say for most things. He is 68 years old. His lower back aches with the persistence of a bad debt. His left shoulder carries a torn rotator cuff that flares up whenever the temperature drops below 50, which in the Nevada high desert is more often than anyone who has not lived here would believe. His knuckles are thick and scarred, the kind of hands that carry a long history and have mostly stopped advertising it. The temper that once ran close to the surface has quieted considerably. What replaced it is not peace exactly, more like exhaustion that has learned to pass itself off as patience. He flips the bacon. The grease pops. A small bead of it lands on the back of his left hand, and he does not flinch. He has been burned in that exact spot so many times that the skin there no longer fully registers pain. It has simply accepted the occupation. This is his life. He built it deliberately the way a man builds a wall between himself and a flood. Every morning he arrives at 4:45. He brews the first pot of coffee. He slices the bread. He preps the eggs and the potatoes and the sausage links and the thick-cut Canadian bacon that 2 of his regulars insist on, even though he has told them both separately that it costs him more to stock than it earns him to sell. He opens the door at 6. He closes it at 2 in the afternoon. He drives his 12-year-old pickup back to the trailer he rents from a man named Purvis, who lives 4 miles down the dirt road and who has never once asked Dax a personal question in all the years of their arrangement. He sleeps. He wakes. He does it again. 15 years of this. 17 if you count the 2 years after he got out of Ely State Prison when he was still too raw and too watched to settle anywhere for long. But 15 years of this specific life, this specific diner, this specific routine. Long enough that some people in the county have started to think of Dax Mercer as a fixture like the water tower on Route 9 or the abandoned Texaco on the county line. Something that was simply always there. They do not know what he was before. He has made certain of that. The bell above the front door does not jingle. It clunks a flat metallic sound like a dropped socket wrench. Dax does not turn around at the sound. He knows who it is by the hour. It is Tuesday. Wren Holden is 79 years old, and she has been coming to Mercer's every Tuesday morning for 11 years. She arrives at 7:15 without exception. She sits at the second stool from the left end of the counter, which is closest to the coffee machine and furthest from the draft that comes under the front door in winter. She takes her coffee, black 2 cups, never 3. She orders the same thing every week, 2 eggs over easy white toast, no butter on the toast, because she says butter is what convinced her late husband Harold to leave the earth at 62, and she intends to outlast Harold by as much as possible out of pure spite. Dax hears her settle onto the stool. The vinyl seat makes a small sound of protest. He pours her coffee without being asked and sets the mug down in front of her empty spot before he turns around. By the time he does, she is already wrapping both hands around it. She is a small woman. That is the first thing most people notice about Wren Holden, And also the last thing they remember about her after a conversation, because every other impression gets crowded out by the sheer density of her presence. Her hair is white and cut short, and she does not apologize for it. Her eyes are the color of good river water, clear and slightly cold. She has lived on the 14 acres adjacent to Mercer's for going on 30 years, since before the highway was rerouted and the traffic thinned, and most of the other homesteaders in the area gave up and sold. She did not give up. She does not appear to know how. Dax starts her eggs. She does not speak for the first 10 minutes. This is not unusual. Ren Holden is one of the few people Dax has ever met who understands that silence between two people can be a form of respect rather than neglect. She drinks her coffee. She looks out the window at the pale desert light coming in sideways across the highway. Dax cooks. The bacon pops. The eggs set. He plates them and slides the plate across the counter, and she picks up her fork, and for a little while there is nothing in the room but the sounds of a diner doing what a diner is supposed to do. Then she reaches into the pocket of her canvas barn jacket and places an envelope on the counter beside her plate. It is a business envelope, white, already open. The paper has been folded and unfolded enough times that the creases are soft and beginning to separate. She does not say anything. She does not push it toward him. She just sets it there and keeps eating. Dax wipes his hands on his apron. He picks up the envelope. He reads it. The letterhead says Voss Property Group in clean serif font. The address is a post office box in the county seat. The letter itself is brief, formally polite, in the way that formal politeness is sometimes its own kind of threat. It informs the recipient that Voss Property Group has submitted a formal offer to purchase the property at the listed parcel address, that the offer reflects current assessed value plus a standard acquisition premium, and that the recipient has 30 days to respond before alternative acquisition methods may be explored. Alternative acquisition methods. Dax reads that phrase twice. Then he sets the letter down on the counter and looks at Ren. This is the third one, she says. Her voice is level, unhurried, the voice of someone who has already done their grieving about something and arrived on the far side of it. The first came in February, the second in March. Now this, have you talked to anyone? Dax says. I'm talking to you. He means a lawyer, an attorney. She picks up her toast and takes a bite. I talked to Randy Caldwell over in Pioche. He said these letters are standard pressure tactics and that no one can force me to sell. Then he charged me $240 to tell me that. Dax folds the letter along its existing creases and slides it back to her. She puts it in her pocket without looking at it. He goes back to the griddle. He scrapes the surface clean with the edge of the spatula, slow, methodical strokes. The metal against metal makes a sound he finds clarifying. Physical, simple, without ambiguity. He does not tell her not to worry. He does not tell her it will be fine. He does not know that it will be fine. He has lived long enough to stop saying things he cannot back up. She finishes her eggs. She finishes her second cup of coffee. She pays $8.50 and leaves the same $2 tip she always leaves, which Dax keeps meaning to argue with her about and never does. The bell above the door clunks shut behind her. The diner fills and empties in its usual rhythm through the morning. A pair of highway maintenance workers who come in every Tuesday. A woman named Sandra who drives 40 minutes from her ranch because she says it is the only place in the county that gets the hash browns right. An older man named Boyd, a long-haul trucker who runs the I-93 corridor and stops in whenever his timing brings him through before noon. Boyd takes the corner booth and nurses his black coffee for 45 minutes and talks to nobody. Dax likes Boyd for exactly this reason. By 11, the rush, such as it is, has passed. By 1:30, Dax is alone. He wipes down the counters. He refills the napkin holders. He mops the part of the floor near the door that always gets tracked with grit and gravel. Physical work, simple work, the kind that fills up the hours without requiring anything from the part of him he keeps carefully locked away. He closes it too. He flips the sign. He sits on the far stool where customers never sit and pours himself a cup of coffee he does not drink and looks out the window at the highway. The afternoon light out here does not soften. It does not cast interesting shadows. It hammers everything flat and bleaches it until color becomes a matter of memory rather than observation. The highway runs straight in both directions until it disappears into its own shimmer. Nothing moves. He looks at the wall behind the register. There is one photograph there. It is held to the wall with a single thumbtack through the upper left corner, which means it hangs at a slight angle that Dax has never straightened. He does not know why he has never straightened it. Maybe because straightening it would mean looking at it directly for longer than he usually allows himself. The photograph is of a boy who is 15 years old. He is sitting on a porch step that Dax does not recognize, the porch of a house Dax was never invited to. The boy is looking down at something in his hands, a length of wire or a small tool of some kind, and his face is turned 3/4 away from the camera. You can see the dark hair that falls across the forehead, the set of the shoulders that is already carrying the tension of a young man who has learned to expect disappointment as a matter of course. He does not look angry in the photograph. He looks finished, like someone who has completed an internal accounting and closed a ledger. Dax looks at the photograph for as long as he can stand, which tonight is about 40 seconds. Then he looks away. He drives home. He heats a can of soup he does not taste. He sits in the single chair in the living room of his rented trailer and watches the light leave the desert through the window until the window is just a dark rectangle and he is sitting in a room lit only by the lamp in the corner. He does not turn on the television. He does not read. He sits. He goes to sleep at 9:30. He wakes at 4:15. He does it again. 3 weeks pass in this manner. The letters from Voss Property Group do not stop. Ren does not mention them again after that first Tuesday, but Dax notices things. He notices that she starts arriving earlier at 7 sharp instead of 7:15. He notices that she sits differently on the stool, with her shoulders pulled in slightly, the way a person sits when they are cold, even when the room is warm. He notices that she drinks her second cup faster and leaves before she has entirely finished her toast. He does not say anything about what he notices. That is not what they do. But he notices. On a Thursday in late October at 20 minutes past 11 in the morning, 3 men walk through the front door of Mercer's. Dax knows the type before they reach the counter. He has known the type since before these 3 men were born. They are young, early 20s wearing clothes that cost money in a way designed to announce that fact. The one in front has a puffy nylon jacket in a shade of blue that belongs on a ski slope and nowhere near a Nevada diner. His name, Dax will learn later, is Colt. Colt has the posture of a man who has decided he is dangerous without ever having tested the theory seriously. The 2 behind him are interchangeable in the way that certain kinds of followers always are distinguished only by the fact that one of them chews gum with his mouth open and one of them does not chew gum at all. Boyd is in the corner booth. He is on his second coffee and reading a folded newspaper. Sandra left 20 minutes ago. There is nobody else. Colt walks to the counter and puts both palms flat on the surface the way someone does when they want to claim a piece of territory without paying for it. Dax is at the griddle. He does not turn around immediately. He finishes moving the spatula across the surface in the stroke he was already making, scraping the last of the lunch grease into the trap. Then he turns. He looks at Colt. Colt looks at him. The math of the moment is immediate and mutual. Colt sees an old man with a gray beard and a stained apron, and hands that shake slightly from the arthritis in his right wrist on cold mornings. Dax sees a boy who has never been properly frightened and does not know that this is a problem. Coffee, Dax says. Colt smirks and glances at his friends and looks back. Sure. Pour some coffee, old man. Dax pours 3 mugs. He sets them down. He goes back to the counter and picks up his damp rag and begins wiping down the surface in front of them with the same slow circular strokes he uses every day. We have been driving through this area a lot lately, Colt says, looking after things, making sure businesses are operating without any unnecessary trouble. Dax keeps wiping. You know how it is out here, Colt continues. Isolated, things can happen. Vandalism, accidents. It is a good idea for a business owner to have the right kind of relationship with people who know the area. Dax sets the rag down. He looks at Colt directly. In the corner booth, Boyd has gone very still behind his newspaper. I have been running this place for 15 years, Dax says. I do not have trouble. Colt's expression shifts slightly. This is not the response the script calls for. Everybody has trouble, eventually, Colt says. We are just offering to make sure yours stays manageable. A small monthly contribution. Dax picks up the rag again. He turns his back and walks toward the coffee machine. He hears the sound before he fully processes it. The heavy crash of the glass sugar dispenser being knocked off the counter. The crystals scatter across the floor with a soft rushing sound like sand through fingers. Then the squeal of Boyd's table being shoved. Boyd lets out a grunt as his coffee goes over. He hits the corner of the booth trying to get up and goes down hard, his elbow cracking against the linoleum. Dax does not think. He is 68 years old with a bad back and a shoulder that screams in the cold, and he has not been in a serious physical altercation in 17 years. None of this matters. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. It is faster than memory. He picks up the heavy ceramic mug sitting on the counter beside the machine and turns and swings it in a short, hard arc as Colt steps around the end of the counter toward him. The mug connects with the bridge of Colt's nose. Ceramic and cartilage. Coffee still hot explodes across Colt's face and jacket. Colt screams. It is a high, startled sound, the sound of someone encountering a consequence they had not factored into their planning. The two men behind him do not freeze for long. What happens next is not a fight in any cinematic sense. It is an accounting. Dax gets the first man with an elbow to the throat before he can get his footing, but the second man comes over the counter and catches Dax in the cheekbone with a closed fist, and Dax's vision whites out for a moment, and his boots slip on the floor mat, and he goes down against the prep table. The table catches him under the ribs on the left side. He feels the sharp pop of something giving way in a place that has given way before, and he knows immediately what it is. He has broken those ribs before twice. He knows the sound they make. They do not stop when he goes down. He curls inward, chin to chest, forearms up. He has done this before too, the geometry of surviving something you cannot stop. He takes the kicks to the thigh, to the shoulder, to the base of his spine. He tastes blood again. Still familiar. Still that same old coin and asphalt vintage. Above him, the sounds of destruction are methodical. The pie case goes over with a crash of glass. The register drawer is ripped open, coins scattering. The espresso machine takes a blow from something heavy, and the water line underneath snaps, and hot water begins spraying across the kitchen floor in a scalding mist. Boyd is gone. Dax hears the back door bang open and then nothing but the hiss of the broken water line, and Colt's voice thick and nasal with blood screaming at the others to finish it. Then footsteps. Then the front door. Then the flat clunk of the bell. Then silence except for the water and the drip of something landing on the floor near his head. He lies still for a while. His cheek is against the cold linoleum, and he can see at eye level a dead moth near the floor drain, with its wings stuck flat against the wet grime. He focuses on breathing. Each breath is a negotiation with the broken ribs. In, out, in, out. He is 68 years old and the floor is cold, and his diner smells like ruined espresso in someone else's mess. He gets up slowly and without any pretense of grace. He grabs the edge of the prep table and hauls himself to standing and holds there until the room stops shifting. His left eye is swelling. His ribs grind with every breath. He looks around. The diner is a carcass. Glass everywhere. The register open and empty. The pie case gone. 2 stools knocked over. The floor near the espresso machine is already pooling with hot water that has started to cool against the linoleum. Dax takes a dish towel from the rack beside the grill and presses it against his split lip. He stands in the middle of the wreckage of his kitchen and does not move for a long time. Not thinking exactly. Processing the way a system does when it has taken on more than it can immediately sort. He limps to the back of the kitchen and through the heavy door into the small office that serves as his supply room and on bad nights, his bedroom. A cot along one wall, a battered metal desk, filing cabinet, and in the far corner shoved against the baseboard so tight you might mistake it for a piece of the building itself, a heavy iron-bound footlocker. The padlock on it is rusted solid. He has not opened it in 15 years. He did not keep the key because keeping the key would have meant keeping the option, and he did not want the option. He opens the bottom drawer of the desk and takes out the bolt cutters. It takes 3 attempts. His ribs make the third one cost him considerably, a sound escaping his throat that he does not intend to make and does not repeat. But the shackle breaks and he pulls the lock free and he opens the lid. The smell comes up immediately. Motor oil, sun-baked road dust, old leather, and something beneath those things that has no polite name. The smell of a life lived in a direction for a long time. It bypasses rational thought entirely and lands somewhere older and more immediate. He reaches inside. The cut is heavy denim, the sleeves hacked off at the shoulder seams decades ago. The fabric carries the stains of decades grease and road grime and darker older things. He lifts it out and holds it in both hands without putting it on and looks at the back. The patch is still vivid. The winged death's head, the top rocker in crimson letters spelling out Hell's Angels, the bottom rocker showing territory, and over the left chest the small rectangular patch that most people in this world will never earn and a smaller number will ever fully understand. Filthy few. A patch given only to men who have done the darkest and most specific kind of work on behalf of the Brotherhood. Men for whom a certain line was crossed and then crossed again until the line itself ceased to exist as a meaningful reference point. He holds the vest for a moment, then he sets it down on the desk and reaches back into the footlocker. Beneath where the vest was sitting at the very bottom, folded once, is a piece of notebook paper. The paper is yellowed and the fold has gone soft at the creases from years of compression under the weight of the leather above it. He did not put it there intentionally. He put the vest in the footlocker, and the vest must have been folded over. It must have carried it in somehow from the last place he was living before he came here, and he never looked carefully enough to notice it. He unfolds it now. The handwriting is the handwriting of someone who learned to write clearly and then unlearned it on purpose, the way teenagers sometimes do, pressing the pen hard enough to score the paper, the letters big and slightly uneven, with the anger of someone putting force into each stroke because they want the force to carry. It says, "Don't bother coming back." 4 words, no greeting, no signature. He does not need a signature. He knows this handwriting. He knew it when the boy was small and the letters were round and effortful and pleased with themselves. He knew it when the boy was older and the letters grew sharp. He knows it now. Declan was 15 when he wrote this. Dax was 43. The judge gave him 8 years and he served 6. And when he got out, Declan was 21 and living somewhere that Dax did not know and had made clear he did not want Dax to find out. Dax looks at the 4 words for a long time. Then he folds the paper along its existing creases and places it carefully on the desk beside the vest. He picks up the vest. He puts it on. His bad shoulder protests the movement of getting the right arm through the armhole. He does it anyway. The leather settles onto his shoulders with a weight that is not entirely physical. The room does not change. The sound of the broken water line dripping in the kitchen does not change. The dim light from the single bulb does not change. But something in the quality of the air shifts the way air shifts when a door opens somewhere else in a house. Not a sound more, a change in pressure. He sits down at the desk. He picks up the old handset phone he keeps because it still works, and he does not trust wireless things. He dials a number from memory. Some numbers you do not forget because they are attached to things that do not heal, like a scar that changes texture with the weather. It rings 3 times. A voice answers. Rough male, not fully awake. "Yeah, it's Dax," he says. A long pause. He can hear a television being muted. The quality of a man sitting up in the dark. "Dax," the voice says it the way you say the name of something you were told was gone. There is something in it that is not quite surprise and not quite relief and probably has no single clean word. "A long damn time, brother. I need the boys to ride out," Dax says. His voice is steady. The exhaustion in it is real, but beneath the exhaustion is something else. Something that has been cold and still for 17 years and has just felt a drop of heat. "Somebody just woke me up." He sets the phone down. He looks at the 2 things on the desk in front of him. The 4 words in his son's handwriting. The letter from Voss Property Group that Wren left on the counter that morning, which he picked up before closing and brought back here without quite knowing why. Outside, very far away, too far to hear yet, the first vibration reaches the highway. Not a sound, not yet. Just a trembling in the distance, a change in the air over the asphalt, the way the ground registers the approach of something heavy before the ears do. Dax presses one hand flat against his taped ribs and breathes in carefully. The pain is clean and specific and real. He is 68 years old, and the floor of his kitchen is covered in broken glass, and the diner he built with 15 years of 5 o'clock mornings is sitting in pieces 30 feet from where he is sitting. He is not angry. He is awake. The vibration reached the diner's cracked linoleum before the sound did. Dax felt it through the soles of his boots. First, a low, persistent trembling that moved up through the floor joists and into his legs like something waking beneath the desert. He was sitting on an overturned milk crate behind the counter, one hand pressed flat against the dish towels wrapped around his midsection, breathing in the shallow, careful way a man breathes when his ribs have opinions about everything. The broken water line had finally stopped spraying. The kitchen smelled of cold grease and wet concrete, and the quiet that follows destruction. Then the sound arrived. It came from the west, rolling down the highway in a low, sustained wave, not loud yet but wide, filling the full width of the night rather than cutting through it. The sound of heavy engines running in formation, throttled back to a steady growl that does not ask permission to occupy a space. Headlights swept across the shattered front window, yellow and sharp, moving slow. Then they cut. One by one, the engines dropped to idle and then to silence, each going quiet in sequence like a sentence being finished word by word. Then boots on gravel, heavy, unhurried. 5 men came through the open frame of the front door. The door itself was still attached to its hinges, but the glass panel had been kicked out and nobody had swept the frame clean. So the men stepped through with the care of people accustomed to moving through spaces that have recently been made dangerous. Garrett Briggs came through first. He was 66 years old and he had been riding since he was 17, and it showed in the way he moved, which was deliberate and slightly stiff, but with a residual power in the joints that suggested things had not always been this measured. His beard was white and long and tied off with 2 small rubber bands near the bottom. His cut was open over a flannel shirt, and the patches on it carried the specific wear of the years. They represented the kind that accumulates slowly and cannot be faked. He had deep lines around his eyes and a jaw that had been broken twice and had set slightly wrong both times, giving his face a quality of permanent resolution, as if he had already made every important decision and was simply waiting for events to catch up. He stopped in the center of the diner and looked around. He looked at the glass on the floor and the open register and the espresso machine with its side caved in and the dark stains spreading from the broken water line. He cataloged it without editorializing. Then he looked at Dax on the milk crate. He did not offer pity. Between men who have known each other as long as Garrett Briggs and Dax Mercer, pity is its own kind of insult. Instead, he reached inside his jacket and pulled out a pint bottle of rye whiskey and held it out across the counter. Dax shook his head. Garrett looked at the bottle for a moment and then put it back. "How bad?" Garrett said. "Ribs," Dax said. "Left side, same ones as Kingman." Garrett nodded. The men behind him spread out without being told, 2 going into the kitchen, one checking the back door, one standing near the front with his arms loose at his sides. They had done this before, the quiet occupation of a space that needed securing. 3 of them, Dax said. Young, early 20s. The one in front had a blue jacket, squeaky shoes. I broke his nose with a coffee mug. They stomped me, took the register, broke the water line, left maybe 20 minutes before I called you. "He give you anything?" Garrett said. "Not a name. But they have been through here before. I have seen the blue jacket twice in the past month, once at the fuel stop on Route 9, once slow-rolling the parking lot on a Saturday afternoon when I was closing up. They are not passing through. They are working something." Garrett turned and looked at the man nearest the door, a younger member named Wade, who had the build of someone who had played high school football and never fully stopped. Wade nodded and stepped outside. Garrett came around the end of the counter. He stood close enough to look at Dax's face properly. The swollen eye, the split lip, the way Dax was holding his left arm slightly away from his body to keep pressure off the ribs. "You need a hospital," Garrett said. "I need about 4 hours," Dax said. Garrett looked at him for a moment, deciding whether an argument was worth the energy. He decided it was not. He pulled a stool close and sat. He folded his hands on the counter. The silence between them had the texture of something worn smooth by long use. Not uncomfortable, not tense. Simply the silence of 2 men who had been in enough difficult rooms together that a difficult room no longer required filling with sound. "You still got the footlocker," Garrett said. It was not a question. He had seen the vest. Dax looked down at the patches on his chest. "Yeah." Garrett did not say anything else about it. Wade came back inside after 10 minutes. He spoke quietly to Garrett, and Garrett listened without expression, and then Wade stepped back. "There is a cluster of trailers out near the old Consolidated Copper site," Garrett said to Dax. About 9 miles east. Wade knows a guy who knows the area. Says a group of young guys have been using the far end of the property for about 3 months, running small operations shakedowns on the highway businesses mostly. Nothing organized enough to attract serious attention. He says the guy in the blue jacket has been seen out there. Dax stood up from the milk crate. He moved carefully, one hand on the counter, his weight favoring the right side. He straightened to his full height. The vest settled on his shoulders. The change in the room was immediate. The two younger men who had been talking quietly near the kitchen door stopped talking. Wade went still. Even Garrett adjusted his posture slightly, the way men do in the presence of something that carries its own gravity. The patch did that. Not the man wearing it or not the man alone. The patch and the man together, the combination of those things in that room at that hour produced a quality of attention that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with history. Dax picked up his keys from the hook beside the back door. Tommy brought the truck, Garrett said. You ride with him. Dax did not argue. He walked through the kitchen, stepping over the glass and out the back door into the cold. The night air hit his face with the clarity of Nevada desert, cold clean, and immediate pulling the blood to the surface of his skin. The sky was enormous and black and full of stars that had no competition from any artificial light for 20 miles in any direction. 5 motorcycles sat in the parking lot in a staggered formation, their exhaust pipes ticking as they cooled. Behind them, idling with its lights off, was a heavy-duty pickup truck in primer black, so old, the body panels had developed their own individual relationships with rust. The man behind the wheel was named Tommy Rusk. He was 54 years old, bald in a way that looked like a decision rather than a concession, with a network of scars across his scalp from an incident in Flagstaff in the early 2000s that he did not discuss. He had been, before anything else, a forensic accountant for the IRS. He had left that position under circumstances that were never fully explained publicly. He had been with the club for 18 years. Dax climbed into the passenger seat. The door closed with the heavy finality of old American steel. You look terrible, Tommy said. Thank you, Dax said. Tommy put the truck in gear. The convoy moved east on the highway without lights for the first quarter mile, navigating by moonlight in the faint gray definition of the road surface in the dark. Then Garrett, leading on his bike, turned on a single headlight, and the others followed. They ran quiet throttles barely above idle, the engines dropping to a mutter that the desert absorbed without difficulty. Dax watching the highway through the cracked windshield. The yellow center line appeared and disappeared in the beam ahead. His ribs ached with the persistence of a claim he could not dispute. He pressed one hand against them and breathed through his nose. He had not ridden with Garrett in 17 years. He had not worn the cut in 17 years. The familiarity of it was worse than he had expected. Not comforting, not welcome, just immediate, the way certain smells are immediate, bypassing evaluation and landing directly in the part of the brain that simply recognizes. He had left this because he had to, because the alternative was Declan growing up with a father who was either in a cell or on his way back to one, because the math of his life at that point only resolved one way, and the resolution required burning everything else down first. He had burned it. He had done 17 years of atonement in the form of bad coffee and broken stools in a parking lot full of nobody. And it had not been enough. He knew it had not been enough because the letter was still in the footlocker, and the boy in the photograph on his wall still had his face turned away from the camera, and somewhere in Reno, a 43-year-old man named Declan Mercer was living a life that did not include his father and had made clear he wanted it that way. Don't bother coming back. The convoy turned off the highway onto a rutted access road that wound behind a low ridge. The terrain here was old mining country, the ground disturbed and piled into irregular shapes by decades of extraction, slag heaps and settling ponds, and the collapsed bones of corrugated tin structures that had once housed equipment and now housed nothing but darkness and rust. Tommy killed the headlights. The bikes did the same. They rolled the last 300 yards in darkness. The trailer sat at the edge of the property, separated from the main cluster of derelict structures by 50 yards of open ground. Light leaked from around the edges of a blanket someone had stapled over the single window. From inside came the muffled bass of music playing through a cheap speaker. The air smelled of marijuana and cold beer and wood smoke from a rusted barrel near the door. Garrett signaled. 2 men went around the back. Wade and another member took positions flanking the front. Garrett and Tommy fell in behind Dax. Dax walked straight up the middle. His boots found every beer can and piece of scrap metal in the yard. He did not try to avoid them. He wanted the sound. He wanted Colt to hear him coming. He reached the door and kicked it. The latch tore free of the frame with a sound like a gunshot. The aluminum door snapping back against the interior wall hard enough to crack the cheap paneling. The blanket over the window shook. The music stopped. The air inside was thick and close, the smell of the place rushing out past him as he stepped through the frame. Stale bong water and beer, and the sour accumulation of young men living without discipline in a small space. A single floor lamp in the corner put yellow light on everything. Colt was on the couch. He was holding a blood-soaked rag against his face, his nose swollen to twice its natural width, both eyes blackening from the impact of the coffee mug. The blue jacket was off, crumpled on the floor beside his feet, dark with dried coffee and blood. He looked up when the door came open, and his expression went through several stages, very quickly, startlement, recognition, and then something that was not quite fear, but was standing right next to it. His two men were near the back of the trailer. One had a beer bottle in his hand. The other was standing at a small propane stove with his back to the door. They both turned. The one with the beer bottle saw the patches first. The bottle slipped from his hand and hit the linoleum and broke. He did not look down at it. He was looking at the winged death's head on the back of the vest as Dax turned slightly to move further into the room. The color left the young man's face with the speed of water leaving a dropped glass. Dax walked to the center of the room. He stood in front of Colt. He looked down at him. Colt opened his mouth. Dax waited. "Man," Colt said. His voice was thick and nasal. "We did not know. We did not know who you were. It was just a job, just a gig somebody put us on to. We had no idea. We can pay back the register money right now. It is right there on the table." He pointed at a small stack of crumpled bills on the coffee table. There was maybe $60. Dax looked at the money. He looked back at Colt. "Who put you on to it?" he said. Silence, the kind that is a decision being made under pressure. Dax reached down and took hold of Colt's right hand. Colt made a sound and tried to pull back, and Dax held the hand with a grip that did not negotiate. He turned it palm down and pressed the forearm against the edge of the coffee table with a slow, deliberate force that communicated exactly what it was communicating and left no room for misinterpretation. Colt talked. The name came out fast and shapeless, running together with apologies and the verbal debris that fills the space around a confession extracted under duress. But the name was in there, and Dax heard it clearly. "Voss," Colt said. "Guy named Voss. He pays us to run pressure on the holdouts. The businesses and the landowners on the old highway stretch. We don't ask what it is for. He pays in cash. We meet once a month at a gas station in Caliente to pick up the cash. We never met him in person, I swear to God." Dax let go of his hand. He stood up straight. He put his hand in the breast pocket of the vest and took out the folded Voss Property Group letter that Wren had left on the counter that Tuesday morning. He unfolded it and looked at the letterhead. Voss Property Group, a post office box, and at the bottom a contact name in small type he had not noticed before. Dale T. Voss, Managing Director. Dax went still. Garrett had come in behind him and was standing near the door. He saw Dax's face change and he waited. "Dale Voss," Dax said. He said it quietly to no one in particular. He said it the way you say a word you thought you had forgotten and then find suddenly and completely in your mouth. Garrett looked at him. "You know that name," Garrett said. It was not a question. Dax folded the letter and put it back in his pocket. He looked at Colt one more time. Colt was shaking both arms wrapped around himself, the rag pressed to his ruined nose. "Get out of this county," Dax said. "If I see the blue jacket again, I will not send you home." He walked out of the trailer. The night air received him without comment. He stood in the yard among the beer cans in the cold and looked at the sky for a moment. Garrett came out behind him. The other men filtered back from the rear of the trailer. Nobody spoke. Garrett stood beside him, lit a cigarette, waited. "Dale Voss," Dax said again. 20 years ago, he was a deputy sheriff in Churchill County. He testified at my trial, stood up in that courtroom in a pressed uniform, and told the jury exactly what they needed to hear. He was specific, and he was calm, and he was believable. He had the kind of face that juries trust without knowing why. And everything he said was true enough to be useful and shaped carefully enough to be something other than what it presented itself as. Garrett blew smoke into the cold air. He put me away for 8 years, Dax said. I served 6. Declan was 15 when I went in. He was 21 when I got out. He was already gone. Garrett did not say anything. He smoked. Now this man has a property group in a post office box, and he is running pressure on an old woman's land, Dax said. And he is using 20-year-old kids to do the dirty work because he has always understood how to keep his own hands clean. He turned and walked to the truck. He did not sleep that night. He drove back to Mercer's with Tommy silent beside him, and when they reached the diner, Dax climbed out and told him to go. He would be all right. He needed to be alone. Garrett looked at him for a long moment and then nodded, and the bikes started, and the convoy pulled back onto the highway, and the sound of it faded west into the dark. Dax went inside. He walked to the kitchen first and turned off the water at the main valve. He found a push broom and began sweeping glass. The sound of ceramic and broken steel against the linoleum was harsh and specific, and he found it clarifying in the way that physical work at an unreasonable hour sometimes clarifies when nothing else can. He swept for an hour. He got most of the big pieces. At 3 in the morning, he sat down at the counter with a cup of coffee and pulled the Voss letter out of his pocket and looked at the letterhead again. Dale T. Voss. The 20 years between that courtroom and this counter collapsed without warning. The pressed uniform, the careful words, the jury watching and nodding, and in the gallery, a 15-year-old boy who had come to see his father sentenced, sitting with the stillness of someone who has already decided that what he is watching confirms something he suspected and would rather not have confirmed. Dax had not looked at Declan during the sentencing. He had looked at the wall behind the judge. He had thought that not looking was a kindness. Later, he understood that not looking was a cowardice dressed up as consideration, and that Declan had probably understood it the same way. He folded the letter and put it in his shirt pocket. He finished the coffee. He thought about what he knew and what he still needed to know, and what the relationship between those two things required of him. He fell asleep at this counter at 4 in the morning with his head on his arms. He woke at 6:15 when the light changed, and his body informed him it was past time to start the coffee. He started the coffee. He opened the diner. Wren did not come. He noticed it at 7:30, the empty stool, the absence of the small sounds she made settling in. He told himself she was running late. He told himself she was under the weather. He poured a mug anyway and set it at her spot and let the steam rise until it stopped. By 8, he was not telling himself anything. He locked the diner and drove the 12 minutes to Wren Holden's property. Her driveway was a quarter-mile of packed dirt between 2 rows of old juniper. The house at the end was a single-story ranch built in the 1960s, maintained not lavishly but honestly. The porch had new boards from a repair she had done herself 2 summers ago. The window boxes were empty now in late October, but you could see they had held something living not long before. The front door was open. Not ajar, open, pushed back against the interior wall, the way a door goes when someone has moved through it quickly without bothering to pull it behind them. The screen door was hanging by one hinge. Dax stopped the truck and sat for a moment with the engine running. He looked at the open door and the hanging screen and the absolute stillness of everything around it. There were no other vehicles, no sound from inside. He turned off the engine. He walked up the porch steps and through the open door. The front room was not destroyed. There was no overturned furniture, no sign of a struggle in the conventional sense. But things were wrong in the way that things are wrong when someone has left a space in a hurry. They did not intend a book open and face down on the arm of the chair, a lamp still on in the morning, a pair of reading glasses on the floor near the kitchen doorway. He walked into the kitchen. The coffee maker had completed a cycle, and the pot was full and still warm. Her mug was on the counter with a small amount of coffee in the bottom that had begun to dry around the edges. On the kitchen table, held flat by the ceramic salt shaker, was a piece of paper. He picked it up. The handwriting was Wren's clear and deliberate, as always the handwriting of a woman who had been taught by nuns and never fully shook the influence. It said, "Don't make it worse, Dax." 4 words, the same number as the other letter. He noticed that and put the thought away. He stood in the kitchen holding her note. The refrigerator hummed. The coffee maker made a small settling sound as it cooled. He looked around the room the way he had not allowed himself to look before, really looked with the full attention of someone who was no longer just a customer and a neighbor, but something more complicated than either. The kitchen was lived in. Functional spare organized by a woman who had been cooking for herself for a long time and knew exactly what she needed. A row of hooks by the back door with her barn jacket missing, which told him something about the sequence of what had happened. Photographs on the refrigerator held by magnets. He looked at them without approaching. Then his eyes moved to the wall beside the hallway door. There was a single frame photograph there. Small frame, simple wood hung at eye level. He walked to it. The boy in the photograph was 15 years old. He was sitting on a porch step looking down at something in his hands, his face turned 3/4 away from the camera, his dark hair falling across his forehead. He was wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves pushed up, and his shoulders carried that specific tension of a young man bearing a weight he has not yet learned to set down. It was the same photograph that was on the wall of Mercer's, held by a single thumbtack in the upper left corner. Identical. The same moment. The same boy. Dax stood in front of it for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Outside in the junipers, a bird made a sound once and then went quiet. Ren Holden, 79 years old, 14 acres adjacent to his diner, 11 years of Tuesday mornings, 2 eggs over easy, no butter on the toast, black coffee, 2 cups, never 3. A woman who had never once asked him a personal question and had never once answered one directly, and had for 11 years simply been present at the counter at 7:15 every Tuesday morning in a way that was without agenda, without demand, offering only her company and expecting only coffee in return. The grandmother of his son, he did not know how long she had known. He did not know if it was accident or intention that had put her adjacent land next to his diner 11 years ago. He understood only that she had been here for 11 years on Tuesday mornings and that she had left him a note that said, "Don't make it worse," rather than a note that asked for help, and that the distinction between those two instructions said everything about the kind of woman she was. He took the note from his pocket. He read it again. Then he put it in his breast pocket next to the Voss letter. He turned to leave the kitchen and then stopped. On the counter beside the coffee maker, in a spot he had not examined carefully enough when he first came in, was a large manila envelope. It was sealed. His name was written on the front in Wren's careful handwriting. Not Dax. His full name, Dax Mercer. The kind of formality that means something in a document rather than a conversation. He opened it. Inside was a thick sheaf of papers, handwritten notes in Wren's script, organized by date, the first entry 6 months ago. Printed pages that appeared to be public records, property transfer documents, tax assessments, deed recordings. A hand-drawn map of the highway corridor, 14 miles of it, with parcels marked and labeled and annotated in different colored pencils. Notes beside each parcel in Wren's handwriting, dates, amounts, names, and beside several of them, a word underlined: coercion. She had been building this for 6 months, patiently, carefully, with the thoroughness of someone who understood that patience deployed with precision is its own form of weapon. She had documented every transaction, every transfer, every pressure tactic she could verify or credibly infer. 40 parcels along the old highway corridor acquired or in process by Voss Property Group over 3 years. The 2 remaining parcels that had not transferred were hers and his. At the back of the envelope, paperclipped to a printed satellite image of the highway corridor with a large area highlighted in yellow, was a single index card in Wren's handwriting. It said, "There is a casino license pending with the State Gaming Commission. The application lists Voss Property Group as principal landholder of the development corridor. They need all 42 parcels for the license to be valid. They need mine and yours." And below that, in smaller letters, "I have been waiting for someone stubborn enough to use this." Dax stood at the counter and read through the file for 20 minutes. He read with the care of someone whose understanding of a situation has just changed dimensions. When he finished, he put the papers back in the envelope and held it in both hands for a moment. Then he walked out of Wren Holden's kitchen, through her front room, across the porch, with its honest boards and its empty window boxes, and down the steps to his truck. He sat in the driver's seat with the engine off. He held the envelope on his knee. He looked at the open front door and the hanging screen and the empty driveway and the neighbors standing in the cold morning air. He thought about Dale Voss on a witness stand, calm and specific and shaped carefully enough. He thought about Ren Holden on a kitchen stool every Tuesday morning for 11 years, not asking, not telling, just present. He thought about a 15-year-old boy looking down at something in his hands with his face turned away from the camera. He put the truck in gear. He drove back to Mercer's. He parked. He went inside and went to the back office and picked up the phone and called Garrett. "Tell Tommy I need everything he can find on a Dale T. Voss," he said when Garrett answered. "Current address, business registrations, any county or state positions past or present, any public records connected to Voss Property Group. Everything that exists in a public record, I want it in front of me by tonight." Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What are you going to do?" Dax looked at the envelope on the desk. He looked at the vest hanging on the hook beside the door. "I am going to finish this," Dax said. He said it evenly, without emphasis, the statement carrying its own weight without needing to be pushed. He set the phone down. Outside, the morning light was doing what Nevada morning light always does at this hour, arriving from behind the mountains, without announcement, filling the desert with a brightness that leaves nowhere to hide. The highway was empty in both directions. Dax looked at the wall. The photograph of Declan was still there, slightly crooked on its thumbtack. The boy in it still had his face turned away, still carried that tension in his shoulders, still looked like someone who had completed an accounting and closed a ledger. Dax had spent 17 years accepting that as the final word. He was done accepting it. Tommy delivered the files at 9 that evening. He came alone, which was how Dax had asked for it. He set a manila folder on the counter without ceremony and poured himself a coffee and sat on the far stool while Dax read. Tommy Rusk understood that his value lay in the quality of information he produced and not in the commentary he added to it, and he honored that understanding by staying quiet. Dax read for 40 minutes. Dale T. Voss, 58 years old, born in Lovelock, Nevada, Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice from the University of Nevada, Reno, class of 1989. Commissioned as a deputy sheriff in Churchill County in 1991. Promoted to senior deputy in 1996. Left law enforcement in 2003, the year after Dax was released from Eli under circumstances recorded in the public file as voluntary separation. The file did not elaborate on the circumstances. It did not need to. Men who leave law enforcement the year after the case that made their career tend to tell their own story to anyone who knows how to read it. After 2003, Voss had moved efficiently and without visible haste into property development. A series of small LLCs registered in Nevada, each holding a parcel or two along rural highway corridors, each dissolved after the properties transferred, and a new one opened to hold the next acquisition. Voss Property Group was the latest and largest incorporated 4 years ago, currently listed as principal applicant on a gaming development license with the Nevada Gaming Commission for a resort casino project on the old Route 9 corridor. Tommy had attached a copy of the Gaming Commission application. Dax read the relevant section twice. The application required demonstration of clear title to all parcels within the designated development zone as a condition of license approval. 42 parcels. 40 were listed as transferred or under binding agreement. 2 were listed as pending negotiation. Parcel 14, A. Ren Holden, current holder. Parcel 14, B. Mercer's LLC, current holder. The casino license could not proceed without both. Dax closed the folder. He looked at the wall. The photograph of Declan was there, slightly crooked, the boy still looking down. Tommy finished his coffee. He stood and put on his jacket. "One more thing," Tommy said. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small piece of paper on the counter. On it was an address in the county seat and a note in Tommy's handwriting. He goes to his office on Saturday mornings. Alone. Opens at 8, leaves by noon. Has done it for 4 years without exception. Dax looked at the address. "Saturday," he said. Tommy nodded. He walked to the door and paused with his hand on the frame. "Garrett wants to know the plan," Tommy said. Dax looked at the folder. He thought about 40 parcels and a gaming license, and a pressed uniform on a witness stand, and an old woman's house with the door open and a coffee pot still warm. "Tell him I will handle the first part myself," Dax said. "Tell him to be ready by 10. Tommy looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded once and walked out into the dark, and the sound of his truck faded east on the highway. Dax sat alone in the closed diner for a long time. He did not move from the stool. He thought about Saturday. He thought about what he was going to say and what he was not going to say, and what he was going to put on the table and how he was going to put it there. He had spent enough years in rooms where things were decided to understand that the manner of a thing carries as much weight as the substance of it. He was not going in loud. He was not going in hot. He was going in the way water goes, finding the exact shape of the space and filling it completely and quietly and without asking permission. He went home. He slept 4 hours. He opened the diner at 6 and ran the Saturday service, which was his lightest of the week, and closed at 11. He drove to the county seat. Voss Property Group occupied the second floor of a 2-story brick building on the main commercial street above a title company that was closed on Saturdays. A discreet placard beside the stairwell door listed the tenants. Dax climbed the stairs without hurrying. The office door at the top was glass-paneled, the company name etched in clean serif font matching the letterhead. Through the glass, Dax could see a reception area that was empty on Saturdays, and beyond it, an inner office where a light was on. He opened the door and walked in. He crossed the reception area and knocked twice on the inner office doorframe and stepped through. Dale Voss was behind his desk. He was a large man, well-maintained in the way that men of his type maintain themselves, the physical presentation of someone who understands that appearance is its own argument. His hair was silver and trimmed. His shirt was pale blue, Oxford pressed. He wore no jacket on a Saturday morning because he was alone and had not expected company. There was a coffee mug on his desk and a spreadsheet open on his computer and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looked up when Dax came through the door. His face went through a rapid sequence of responses that Dax watched with the attention of someone who has spent a lifetime reading rooms. Surprise first, then a brief rapid internal calculation, then a smoothing the face settling back into controlled pleasantness. He did not recognize Dax immediately. That took 3 more seconds, the eyes moving across the face, the beard, the vest with its patches arriving at something that produced a different response beneath the smooth surface. Something that was not ease and was working hard not to show itself, Dax Voss said. He said it carefully, the way you say a name when you want to confirm identification before committing to a reaction. Dax crossed the room and placed the manila envelope on the desk. He placed it flat and centered directly in front of Voss, took his hand off it, and stepped back. Renhold and Dax said, "Where is she?" Voss looked at the envelope. He looked at Dax. The smooth pleasantness was doing its work, but working harder now. "I don't know what you're referring to," Voss said. Dax looked at him. He said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence in a room with a certain kind of man does more than words, because words give the other person something to respond to, and silence gives them nothing but the weight of what they already know pressing down from inside. Voss held the silence for 12 seconds. Dax counted. "She is fine," Voss said. "She is being kept comfortable while we complete a business negotiation. She will be returned to her property as soon as the paperwork is resolved." Dax looked at the envelope on the desk. That envelope contains 6 months of documented property transactions along the Route 9 corridor, Dax said. Purchase dates, amounts, names of sellers, documentation of the methods used to produce agreement from sellers who initially declined. It also contains a copy of the Gaming Commission application and the parcel requirement. And it contains the contact information for the FBI field office in Las Vegas that handles real estate fraud and coercion. He paused. "A copy of that envelope was mailed to that field office 3 days ago," Dax said. The smooth surface cracked slightly. Not enough for most people to see. Enough for Dax. Voss picked up the envelope. He opened it. He moved through the papers with the controlled efficiency of someone rapidly calculating and not wanting the calculation to show. Then he set the envelope down. He looked at Dax and the smooth pleasantness was gone, replaced by something that had always been underneath it. Not rage exactly, more the cold, functional anger of a man who has operated without serious opposition, long enough that opposition feels like a personal affront rather than a legitimate complication. "You want to talk about documentation," Voss said. "Let me tell you something about Declan Mercer. He is 43 years old and he lives in Reno, and he works as a pipe welder for a fabrication company off Highway 395. He does not know his father is alive. He has spent 28 years believing you were either dead or gone by choice, and he has built a life around that belief. A good life, a quiet life. He has a house, he has a dog. He coaches youth baseball on Saturday mornings." Dax stood still. "You walk out of this office and make this difficult." Voss continued, "And I will make sure Declan Mercer knows exactly who and what his father is. Not that you are alive, that part he can find out however he finds it out. I mean what you did to earn that patch. I mean the specific details of the specific actions that put you in Ely for 8 years. All of it documented, source delivered in a way he cannot dismiss or explain away. You will not get a conversation with your son. You will get a door closed in your face by a man who has every reason to close it and now has every piece of information he needs to feel justified in doing so. The office was very quiet. Dax looked at Dale Voss across the desk. He thought about Declan at 15 with his face turned away from the camera. He thought about the 4 words written with force and finality on a piece of notebook paper. He thought about 43 years of a life built around the belief that the father was either dead or gone by choice. He thought about what it would mean for that life, that quiet life with its house and its all and its Saturday mornings on a baseball diamond, to receive a package from a man like Voss containing the full documented weight of who Dax Mercer had been. Something moved through him, not fear exactly, a kind of grief fast and cold for the version of this he could not control. For the door that Voss was describing closing on a face he had not seen in 28 years. And then beneath the grief something else arrived. Quieter, steadier. The recognition that Voss had just told him something true and important without meaning to. That Declan was alive. That Declan had a house and a dog and coached baseball on Saturday mornings and had built something real. That Declan was 43 years old and had been carrying the weight of a missing father for most of his life and had found a way to carry it without being crushed by it. He coaches youth baseball on Saturday mornings. That was not a man who had been destroyed by what happened. That was a man who had found out how to be something good in spite of what happened. And the fact that he had done that without Dax, maybe in some way because of the absence of Dax, did not diminish the loss. But it meant that Declan Mercer was not fragile. He was not a glass object that would shatter at the first piece of difficult truth. He was a man who had already lived with a hard truth for a long time and had made something decent out of the living of it. Voss was watching him, waiting for the calculation to complete in his favor. Dax reached into his shirt pocket. He took out his phone. He set it on the desk face up. The screen was on. The recording application was running. The timer showed 41 minutes and 17 seconds. Every word you just said, Dax said. Voss looked at the phone. The color shifted in his face, not dramatically, just a degree or two. The pallor of a man who has just heard a door close on the path he was standing on. From outside the building through the second-floor window, there came a sound. It started low, felt first in the chest, then in the bones, then in the air itself as it arrived and filled the street. The sound of engines. Not one or two. Many. Voss turned to look at the window. The street below was filling with motorcycles. They came from both ends of the block and from the side streets between the buildings, and they filled the available space without hurry, parking in formation along the curb, the engines dropping to idle one by one and then cutting entirely. 41 bikes. Dax had not counted them. He did not need to. He knew Garrett had brought everyone available within 100 miles when he said be ready by 10. The 2 men who had come in from the reception area during Voss's speech looked at each other. They looked at the window. They looked at Dax. The practiced ease they had carried into the room had developed some complications. Dax picked up the phone from the desk. I am going to get Ren now, Dax said. You are going to tell your men to let that happen. Then you are going to sit here and think carefully about what the next several days are going to look like for you. Where she is, Dax said. Voss was looking at the window, at the 41 motorcycles and the men now dismounting and standing beside their bikes with the unhurried collective stillness of people who have nowhere else to be and are comfortable with that fact. Voss gave him the address. A cabin property 12 miles north in the foothills, registered under one of the dissolved LLCs. Dax knew the road. He had driven past the turnoff 100 times without ever having reason to go up it. He walked to the door. The 2 men stepped aside. He went down the stairs and out onto the street. Garrett was standing beside his bike on the curb. He looked at Dax. Dax gave him the address and Garrett nodded and turned and said something to the men nearest him, and 2 of them moved toward their bikes. Dax held up a hand. They stopped. He looked at Garrett. I go in first, Dax said. Alone. Garrett held his look for a moment. Then he nodded. Dax drove north. The highway came out of town and then the county road, and then the unmarked dirt track that climbed into the foothills through scrub juniper and sage. The morning was clear and cold, the light off the mountains arriving flat and direct. The cabin was simple, wood-sided, a single-car garage attached to propane tank beside it, a well-maintained roof that said someone used this property with regularity. A dark SUV was parked in front, curtains in the windows. Dax parked and got out. He walked to the door and knocked. Not hard, not soft. The knock of someone who was not asking a question. A man opened it after 10 seconds. He looked at Dax. He looked past Dax at the empty driveway and the pickup truck and the absence of visible backup and made a calculation that Dax watched him complete incorrectly. "Mr. Voss sent me," Dax said. "She is going home." The man studied him for another moment. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. The cabin interior was clean and adequately heated. A kitchenette along one wall, a sitting area, a door to the back bedroom closed. Dax walked to the back bedroom door and knocked once and opened it. Wren Holden was sitting in an armchair beside the window. She was wearing her canvas barn jacket. Her hands were not bound. She had a cup of tea on the table beside her, half finished, and a paperback novel open in her lap that she lowered when the door opened. She looked at Dax. She looked at his face, the fading bruise around his eye, the careful way he held his left side. She said, "You took your time." Her voice was completely level, not the level of someone suppressing distress. The level of someone who has been sitting in an armchair reading a novel and waiting with the patience of a person who has been waiting for things their entire life and has become skilled at it. Dax looked at her. The words he might have said and the questions he might have asked were all present, and none of them were right for this moment. "Let us go," he said. She put her bookmark in the novel and set it on the table and finished the last inch of her tea standing up. She set the cup down. She picked up a small canvas bag from beside the chair that she had clearly packed herself at some point neatly, with the efficiency of someone who knows what she needs and does not require more than that. She walked past Dax and through the door and across the cabin. The man in the canvas jacket watched her go. He looked at Dax. Dax looked back at him with the expression that communicates the full content of a situation without requiring words. The man looked away. Dax followed Wren to the truck. She climbed into the passenger seat and set her bag on her lap and buckled her seatbelt. Dax got in. He started the engine. He looked at her. She was looking out the windshield at the mountains. Her profile was composed, the jaw set, the eyes clear. She looked exactly like what she was, which was a woman of 79 years who had seen a great deal and been diminished by very little of it. "He was going to threaten me with Declan," Dax said. "I know," Wren said. "He tried it on me first, yesterday morning." Dax looked at the windshield. "What did you say to him?" Dax said. Wren looked at him, and then a direct look, the kind she deployed rarely and with precision. "I told him that Declan Mercer is a grown man who makes his own decisions, and that the only person whose job it is to have that conversation with him is sitting right in front of me if he ever finds the nerve." Dax said nothing for a long moment. He put the truck in gear. They drove in silence for several miles. The highway came up and he turned south toward Wren's property and his diner and the stretch of Nevada desert that had been both of their lives for a long time in different ways. Wren spoke first. "He has a good life," she said. "Declan. He is not unhappy. He built something real." "I know," Dax said. She did not press him. "He does not know," Dax said after a moment. "No," Wren said. "But he has wondered, the way people wonder about things they have decided not to look directly at. He knows there are edges to the story his mother told him that do not match up quite right. He has known for years. He has chosen not to pull on those edges." Dax thought about that. He thought about a 43-year-old man at a baseball diamond on a Saturday morning. He thought about what it might mean to knock on that door, what he was asking for, what he had any right to ask for. "What does he know about you?" Dax said. "That I exist," Wren said. "That I live in Nevada. We exchange cards at Christmas. I saw him once 3 years ago when he drove through on his way to a job in California. We had lunch. He is a quiet man, careful. He does not give much away." She paused. "He has your jaw," she said, "and your hands, the way they sit when he is not doing anything with them." Dax looked at his hands on the steering wheel. The mountains were behind them now, and the highway stretched out flat and straight ahead, the desert receiving the afternoon light in its usual manner, without sentiment, without any editorial position on the things that traveled across it. The next 10 days moved quietly. Voss Property Group did not communicate with Dax or with Wren. The Gaming Commission application entered what the Commission's public communications log described as a review hold, pending documentation concerns. A brief item in the county newspaper noted that the Churchill County Sheriff's Office had received a federal inquiry related to real estate transactions along the Route 9 corridor and was cooperating fully with investigators. Dax read the item once and did not read it again. He opened the diner at 6 each morning. He closed at 2. He swept the floors and wiped the counters and refilled the napkin holders and cooked bacon and eggs and hash browns for the people who came in, which was not many, which had never been many, which had always been enough. On the Tuesday after Wren came home, she arrived at 7:15. She sat at the second stool from the left. She put both hands around the mug Dax had already poured and did not speak for the first 10 minutes. He started her eggs. She ate. She drank her second cup. She paid $8.50 and left her $2 tip on the counter. She was almost to the door when she stopped. She did not turn around. He coaches on Saturdays, she said. The fields are on Pyramid Way near the fairgrounds. He is usually there by 8. She pushed through the door and the bell clunked shut behind her. Dax stood at the griddle. He pressed the spatula against the surface and listened to the hiss of fat rendering and the hum of the fluorescent light and the sound of the highway outside carrying its occasional traffic through the morning. He thought about Saturday. He thought about a door, about whether he had any right to knock on it, about what he was and what he had done and what the distance was between those things and the man who might show up to a baseball field on a Saturday morning and tell himself he was ready. He did not know if he was ready. He suspected he was not. He suspected that readiness was not the relevant question. The relevant question was whether the thing was true and worth doing regardless of readiness. He had answers to both of those questions, even if he did not entirely like them. On Friday evening, he sat in his trailer and took the footlocker out from under the cot. He opened it. The vest was inside, folded the way he had put it back after the morning at Voss's office. He did not take it out. He looked at it for a moment. Beneath where the vest was sitting, the space was empty. The letter was in his desk drawer at the diner now, in the growing file of things that had needed to be faced. He closed the footlocker. He did not lock it. The broken padlock was still on the desk at the diner. He had not replaced it. He had not decided whether he was going to. He went to bed at 9:30. He woke at 4:15. He made coffee and sat in the chair by the window and watched the desert come out of the dark the way it always did, incrementally, shape by shape, the close things first, and then the mountains gathering themselves out of the gray and the light arriving from behind them without announcement. He drove to the diner. He opened it at 6. At 8, he turned the sign to closed and got in the truck. The drive to Pyramid Way took 20 minutes. He parked in the gravel lot beside the ball fields and sat with the engine off. Through the windshield, he could see the fields, the small figures of children running the bases in the cool morning air, the clusters of parents along the chain-link fence with their coffees, the coaches moving along the baselines. He found him without needing to look long. There is a way that some physical presences locate themselves in a space, something in the proportion or the bearing or the way the weight is carried, and when the presence shares its origin with yours, it produces a recognition that is not quite sight and not quite memory, but something that operates before either of those things. Declan was at the third baseline. He was 43 years old and he was wearing a ball cap and a fleece jacket, and he was crouched down talking to a kid who was maybe 8, showing him something about his grip on the bat, his hands over the child's hands, patient specific. Dax watched for a while. He watched the way Declan moved through the morning. The quietness of it, the ease with the kids, the occasional exchange with the other coaches that was brief and functional and without performance. He watched the jaw that was his jaw and the hands that Wren had described and the set of the shoulders that carried something but had learned to carry it without making it visible. He got out of the truck. He walked across the gravel to the edge of the field and stopped at the fence. He did not go through the gate. He put his hands in the pockets of his jacket and stood there. Practice ended at 9:30. The kids dispersed toward their parents. The coaches collected the equipment, the bases and the helmets, and the bats, sorting it into bags with the efficiency of people who have done this many times. Declan picked up the last equipment bag and turned toward the parking area. He saw Dax at the fence. He stopped. The distance between them was 30 feet of dry grass and 43 years, and a letter written in the handwriting of a boy who had every reason to mean every word of it and probably still did. Dax did not move from the fence. He had thought about this for a long time, and what he had decided was that he did not have the right to close the distance. The distance was Declan's to close or not close, and whatever Declan decided was legitimate, and Dax was going to stand at this fence and let that be true. Declan looked at him across the 30 feet. He looked at the vest, the patches. He looked at the face, the beard gone more gray than it had been in the photograph on Wren's wall, the nose set slightly wrong from being broken more than once, the lines around the eyes that accumulate in the years between a man's 43rd year and his 68th. A long moment passed. Then Declan walked across the grass. He stopped on the other side of the fence. He was close enough now that Dax could see the color of his eyes, which were pale blue, the same careful non-committal blue that Dax saw in his own mirror every morning and had always considered a liability. They looked at each other. There was nothing adequate to say, and Dax had known this and had not prepared anything, because preparation would have been its own kind of lie, the pretense that words could account for the arithmetic of 28 years, and they could not, and he was not going to pretend they could. He said, "I know." 2 words. Not an apology, because an apology was a transaction, and this was not a transaction. Not an explanation, because an explanation was a justification, and he was not here to justify. Just an acknowledgement. "I know what was lost. I know what I owe you. I know that standing here does not pay that debt." Declan looked at him. The morning was cold, and the field was emptying around them, and somewhere in the parking lot a car started, and a child's voice called out, and a dog barked once from across the road. Declan did not speak for a long time. He looked down at the equipment bag in his hand. He shifted his grip on it. The gesture was small, almost nothing, but it was the gesture of a man standing at a threshold and feeling the full weight of it in his body before deciding which direction to step. A moment of real leavening, unhurried, unresolved, the moment before a thing becomes whatever it is going to be. Then he looked up. "There is a diner on Route 9, Declan said. Dax looked at him. "Wren talks about it," Declan said. "She has for years. Eggs and coffee on Tuesdays." "Yes," Dax said. Declan looked at the vest again, at the patches, at whatever he was reading in the face of the man standing on the other side of the fence from him, whatever ledger he was running internally, whatever accounting he had been doing for a long time and had not yet finished. He shifted the equipment bag on his shoulder. "I have got somewhere to be on Saturdays," he said. Dax nodded. Declan held his gaze for one more moment. Then he walked past the fence toward the parking lot. He did not look back. Dax stood at the fence until the truck pulled out of the lot and turned north on Pyramid Way and disappeared. Then he walked back to his own truck. He got in. He sat with the engine off for a long time looking at the empty field. He drove back to Mercer's. The diner was empty, and the morning light was coming through the front windows at the low angle of late October, illuminating the dust on the counter and the scratch on the third stool and the slight lean of the corner booth that had been leaning since 17 years ago when someone drove into the building, and Dax fixed the wall but never got around to the booth. He went behind the counter. He started the coffee. He stood with his hands on the counter and looked at the wall. The photograph of Declan was still there, held by the thumbtack in the upper left corner, hanging at its slight angle. Dax reached up and straightened it. It was a small thing, a half-inch adjustment of a piece of paper on a wall. It took no effort and changed nothing of substance and would not be noticed by any of the customers who came in and sat at the counter and drank their coffee without looking at the walls. He noticed it. He went into the back office. On the desk was the footlocker, sitting open. Beside it on the corner of the desk was the padlock that Garrett had left the previous week, a new one still in its packaging, heavy and clean in silver. Dax looked at it. He picked it up. He turned it over in his hands. He set it back down on the corner of the desk and left it there. He went back to the counter. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat on the far stool, the one customers never used, and looked out the window at the highway. The morning was doing what Nevada mornings do, arriving from behind the mountains without announcement, filling the desert with the brightness that does not soften and does not ask how you feel about it. The highway ran straight in both directions until it dissolved into its own distance. A truck passed going north. Then nothing. Outside, 5 motorcycles turned off the highway and rolled into the parking lot and stopped in a loose formation without being asked to. Their engines cut one by one. The men on them did not dismount. They just sat there in the morning cold, facing the highway, their exhaust ticking quiet in the still air. Dax looked at them through the window. He looked at his coffee. He looked at the wall where the photograph now hung straight. On a Tuesday 7 days from now, at 7:15 in the morning, Ren Holden would sit down on the second stool from the left end of the counter and wrap both hands around a mug he would already have poured. 2 eggs over easy, white toast, no butter, 2 cups of coffee, never 3. And they would sit in the silence that had always been between them. The silence that was not empty, but full of 11 years of Tuesday mornings and everything that had been present in those mornings without either of them naming it. And maybe some Tuesday after that, or some morning that was not a Tuesday at all, there would be a truck in the parking lot with Nevada plates and a man in a fleece jacket sitting at the counter who had Dax's jaw and Dax's hands and 43 years of questions he had not yet decided to pull on. Maybe. Some doors once open cannot be closed again. Dax had known that when he kicked open the footlocker with the bolt cutters. He had known it standing at the fence on the edge of the ball field. He had known it the moment Declan said there is a diner on Route 9, which was not an answer and was not a question, but was the sound of a man standing at a threshold and not yet walking away from it. You could not close those doors. You could only decide what to do with the room you were now standing in. He pushed the coffee mug to one side and stood up. He went to the back office one more time and looked at the padlock on the corner of the desk. He picked it up. He carried it to the back of the office. He put it in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet behind the folders where it was available if he ever decided he needed it and out of sight for now. He left the footlocker open. He walked back into the kitchen and turned on the griddle and listened to it heat up, the familiar tick and hiss of the metal expanding, the smell of the surface warming to temperature. He laid out the bacon. He started the coffee for the second pot. At 6 o'clock, he turned the sign in the window from closed to open. He went back to the griddle. The fat rendered against the hot metal, with its usual sharp and violent hiss, immediate and familiar and without ambiguity. The fluorescent light hummed. The bell above the door waited. Outside on the highway, the morning held the desert in its usual manner, vast and enduring, indifferent to the small human negotiations taking place in a diner on a forgotten stretch of Nevada road. Some things don't need locking away anymore. Some things just need to be set down.